4. Urang Madan. Sometime in the 1940s, a chilling distress call was made, claiming that a ship's captain and his entire crew were killed. The state of Baltimore and the Silver Star, 2 American ships, replied to the call after receiving a message in Morse code that couldn't be understood, except for the last 3 words, "I am dying." The 2 ships were able to pinpoint where the distress call originated by utilizing UK monitoring systems. The Silver Star swiftly changed its course and headed in the direction of the SS Urang Madan. They were on their way to offer assistance despite the confusing call. The Urang Madan showed no evidence of damage when the Silver Star arrived. The radio remained silent despite their attempts to contact the ship. The Silver Star's crew organized a boarding party after several unsuccessful calls to investigate what had transpired on the vessel. What the crew discovered was appalling. After boarding the ship, the squad found the bodies of the Urang Madan's crew laying all over the place. The bodies of some men were twisted or disfigured, and several of them had their hands up as if pointing at something. But to their surprise, all of the deceased men had terrified expressions on their faces. There was a possibility that they'd seen something frightening just before dying. The Silver Star crew determined that no foul play was involved because there weren't any signs of struggle or physical wounds on any of the bodies. When they were finished investigating, they decided it wouldn't be right to leave the ship behind, so they thought they'd tow it behind them instead. Unfortunately, a fire broke out in the ship's cargo hold just as the crew was about to attach a tow line. Shortly after, the vessel became fully engulfed in flames and it eventually exploded. The Urang Madan was launched into the air by the blast before it sank beneath the surface of the ocean. Luckily, the Silver Star's crew was able to escape just in time, and there was no damage to their vessel. Sadly, any proof of the Urang Madan's existence and what happened to her crew went up in flames and sank with the rest of the ship. Interestingly, there's no known marine records of the Urang Madan. Despite the fact that every ship is required to register its routes, port destinations and stops, there's no records that can be found of the vessel. Based on that fact alone, it suggests that the Urang Madan didn't exist at all, and that the story about the ship and its crew is merely fictional. The counter-argument to that theory is that any records or registration data were destroyed after the crew of the Silver Star witnessed what happened to the ship. There's even rumors that the CIA could have been involved in a cover-up. There were several opinions regarding what may have occurred to the crew and what started the fire when people learned about the Urang Madan. Some think the ship was carrying horrific chemical weapons that inadvertently killed the defenseless civilian crew that was tasked with transporting them. However, there are people out there that believe the crew was terrified by either demons or extraterrestrials. There's also conspiracy theorists who say that Urang Madan was really a military vessel with disguised military personnel on board. They believe the ship was carrying an undisclosed weapon that would have altered the course of history. That is, of course, if the Urang Madan hadn't gone up in flames and sank to the bottom of the ocean. A lot of people have started to theorize that the Urang Madan never truly existed because of the numerous stories about it. Despite the vessel's official mentions, it's still unknown exactly what happened to the Phantom ship, whether it was a government cover-up or just a long-running urban legend. Nobody can say for sure. 3. The Golden Eagle. Not even a year after it was released, Stephen King's suspenseful novel about a murderous Plymouth Fury named Christine was made into a movie. The 1964 Dodge 330 limited edition, known as Golden Eagle, served as the inspiration for the book. The police department in Old Orchard Beach, Maine, originally purchased the car. Then, after the initial purchase, it started killing anyone it came across for the next 20 years. Locals still stand by the claim that the car was possessed, despite there being little evidence to back it up. The car only spent a very brief period of time with the Old Orchard Beach Police Department, but 3 different officers went home to murder their families after driving the Golden Eagle. Afterward, they took their own lives. These tragic events prompted the rest of the officers to sell their vehicle. An older man bought it from them and allegedly gifted it to a woman named Wendy Allen, who still owns the car to this day. She drove the car without fear, even though she knew about its history. Despite her demonstrating that there was nothing wrong with the Golden Eagle, the residents of Old Orchard Beach weren't convinced and still viewed the car as a threat. Some even went as far as to say it was possessed by a demon. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, the car was vandalized by a handful of church members and other rebels in the town. Their goal was to get rid of anything evil that might have been dwelling within the vehicle. However, this proved to be a horrible mistake. As a result of the vandalism, anyone who was involved met a gruesome fate. Most of the vandals were run over by 18-wheeler trucks, killing them instantly. Some of them were even decapitated in the process. Those who weren't killed by the semi-trucks were fatally struck by lightning. Unfortunately, the deaths didn't stop with the vandals. It was reported in 2007 that a teen was dared by his friends to touch the car. Then mysteriously, just a few weeks later, he set his house on fire after murdering his entire family. And sadly, the vehicle was also involved in a couple of disturbing incidents involving young kids. There's several stories of children being hit by cars and landing directly on the evil Golden Eagle's hood or nearby it. Another church trying to get rid of the vehicle in 2010. After stealing it from Wendy Allen, members of the church spread pieces of the car all over various junkyards after chopping it up. When she discovered her car was missing, Allen was extremely distraught. She loved her car, haunted or not. She posted about the incident online and eventually gained a supportive following. Soon she had a team of people who helped her track down the majority of the Golden Eagle's parts. Allen feels that the church targets her not only for the car, but because she's interested in the occult. They've called her the Sea Witch of Old Orchard Beach, and they say she's gone around town claiming that she'll use the powers of the car to cast spells of death against them. However, she's denied each of these rumors. Allen loves the Golden Eagle, regardless of its history. She herself has reflected on times where it would release the seat buckles or jam the steering wheel, sometimes even opening its doors at random times while she and her family were inside of it. These days, judging by the current status of the car, it seems like its reign of terror has come to an end. Do you think it's really possible for a vehicle to house a demonic entity? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. 2. Pennsylvania's Bus to Nowhere. Buses are everywhere in Philadelphia, day and night. Most of them have scheduled pickup and drop-off hours, as well as frequent passengers. But according to a local urban legend, one bus has no destination, and it pops up randomly for people who need it. Only those stuck in deep sorrow have boarded this particular bus, ready to bring them to a place of emotional rescue. During this level of sadness, the fate of the bus comes through, offering them a chance to be saved from the clutches of depression. When its trip is complete, the wandering bus, as it's frequently called, disappears into thin air before reappearing somewhere else. The bus and its driver, who always keeps his face hidden, are connected to those in need. The driver is able to sense someone who needs to be picked up, and he'll catch their attention while determining whether or not they're worthy at the same time. He doesn't stop right away, but those in need of help apparently know that the bus is for them. However, they have to wave the bus down in order to board. If a person sees the bus and doesn't wave it down, they'll never see it again. After boarding, the passengers sit in silence and don't speak a word. The entire ride is quiet, with the driver staring ahead, hiding his face. Passengers are aware of one another, but they don't pay attention to the other riders. Once seated, deep reflection begins, where people are forced to face their inner demons. It's been reported that the passengers act out the events in their lives, specifically where everything went wrong for them, in the recesses of their mind. Only when they understand why things turned out the way they did for them do they gain the ability to leave their pain and regret behind. Travel times on the bus vary from person to person. For some, it could take a few hours. For others, it could take days, and for a small handful of people, the journey lasts for years. It depends on how long it takes them to figure out what brought them there in the first place. When a person is ready to leave, they instinctively know, and they simply have to tug on the cord, prompting the driver to stop and let them off. It's been compared to being snapped out of a trance, Some leave triumphant, with a wonderful new outlook on life, ready to rejoin society. The lucky ones board the bus right before things in their lives get bad, and they're able to remedy what happened and fix it before it's too late. Because of the bus, they're able to get through their past by reliving it. Some, however, are unable to face their past because of their inability to face their emotions. Others simply won't come to terms with their wrongdoing, although they do try. However, it's been said that a breakthrough never comes to those who feel they've done nothing wrong, leaving them to ride the bus for the remainder of their lives. There are also those with issues that are beyond what can be solved. Even though the bus is meant for wiping the slate clean, certain things such as awful acts against humanity do not deserve forgiveness. Those few individuals are aware that they're considered a lost cause and are forced to leave the bus, having gained nothing from the experience. Many have referred to the bus as Bus Zero, and it's alleged that the first mention of it came from works of fiction published in 2011. However, dozens of Philly locals challenge the rumor that it's fiction because they claim they've experienced the bus personally. Either this bus, or one very similar to it, has apparently been seen in several places throughout the northeastern United States, further adding to the mystery. It appears to know where it's required and arrives there, operating between the hours of dusk and dawn. The bus to nowhere might be a figment of the public's imagination, or the result of mass hysteria brought on by the first mention of it in 2011. For a lot of people, it's difficult to determine whether it's real or not. Now, this leaves us with one question. Would you ride the bus to nowhere if given the chance? 1. Lincoln's Phantom Train. The 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, spent his entire life in a strange environment full of bizarre happenings and supernatural encounters. Even into adulthood, he was surrounded by the occult because his wife Mary was into spiritualism. She was also a believer in omens and attempted to contact her deceased son Willie by holding seances. Unfortunately, Willie passed away at the age of 11 due to typhoid fever in 1862. Mystery also surrounded Lincoln's untimely demise. He experienced a death-related dream about 2 weeks before he was assassinated. During his dream, Lincoln went to the East Room after he heard people crying. After discovering soldiers standing over a body, he asked them who had died and why were they dead in the White House. A soldier told him it was the president and that he'd been killed by an assassin. He revealed his eerie dream to his wife and a handful of friends, but tragically, there was nothing they could do, and he was assassinated on April 14, 1865. He was killed in the presidential box at Ford's Theater in DC by John Wilkes Booth. Sadly, he only lived for a few hours after the shooting, and he passed away on the morning of April 15th. The entire nation went into mourning as flags were flown at half-mast and bells sang their song across the city. After he died, Lincoln and Willie were both placed in coffins. They were put on a train where they would travel to Springfield, Illinois, Lincoln's hometown. They were to be buried there at Oak Ridge Cemetery. People lined up along the train's route, which ran from Washington to Illinois. Many came to pay their respects to the man who fought so hard during the Civil War. The train was known as the Lincoln Special, and it reached Springfield on May 3, 1865, after departing on April 21st. Allegedly, a phantom form of the train could be seen and heard coming every year at the end of April. It's been reported that as the train passes by, time stands still. Watches and clocks stop, and the air is cool and crisp. And an eerie presence can be felt nearby as clouds block out the moon. While some claim to hear somber music emanating from the train, others swear there's no sound at all when it passes. As the train draws closer, some people notice smoke spewing from the stack, while others hear a creepy whistle. There have been rumors of skeletons dressed all in blue standing guard near Lincoln's flag-draped coffin. As the train disappears from view, flags and streamers connected to it supposedly wave in the wind, but no sound is heard. To this day, gatherings are held to watch for the phantom funeral train in communities across the 7 states. One of these events is held in Albany, New York, on the evenings of April 26th and 27th, and the other is held on April 29th in Urbana, Ohio.
Number 6. Vintage Car Graveyard. There's a truly one-of-a-kind car graveyard located in a forest in western Germany near the city of Dusseldorf. You can find a little bit of everything here. The graveyard's inventory includes a 1950s Willys M38 Jeep, a vintage Rolls-Royce Silver Dawn, a classic Jaguar XK120, and much more. However, vehicles aren't the only thing you'll find in the woods here. Interestingly, there's also a British K6 phone booth from the 1950s, and even a piece of the famous Berlin Wall. Although among the battered remains is a plane with a familiar paint job on its nose. It has a shark face similar to the planes used by the Flying Tigers between 1941 and 1942. What's even more strange is that even though these cars and vehicles seem to be completely abandoned in the forest, they actually have an owner. Michael Froelich is a classic car lover and an automobile expert. He owns the land where the vehicles are sitting, and he deliberately left them in the woods to be at the mercy of Mother Nature. Froelich is a former fashion designer, artist, philosopher, and racer, but these days he's best known as a classic car dealer and a skilled restorer. While Froelich could be driving around in a luxurious vehicle, he chooses to use a charred Rolls-Royce that was almost incinerated when his car dealership burnt down in 2005. The car enthusiast has written multiple reference books, and he's traveled around the world searching for unique automobiles to add to his collection. He calls his classic car graveyard, which is located in the Neander Valley, his Auto Sculpturen Park, or his Auto Sculpture Park. His vintage vehicle museum is surrounded by a security fence, and it's situated in the wooded hillside right next to Froelich's house. All the cars from his collection were parked here in the year 2000 when he turned 50 years old, and interestingly, every vehicle he owns was created in 1950, the same year Froelich was born. Many of them were still operating when they were parked in the woods, never to be driven again. In 2009, Froelich spoke with Von David Crossland with Spiegel International, and he said that the cars were like his brothers. He explained that nature is stronger than technology, and he wanted to showcase that in his personal vehicle museum. Car fans, photographers, and TV crews were invited to the park's opening during the summer of 2000, but it has rarely been open to the public since then. Apparently, the only way to gain access to this place is by contacting Froelich himself to request a visit. Every car on the property has its own interesting story about its past and how it was discovered, so Froelich would likely be the best tour guide you could ask for. Number 5. Davis-Monthan Air Force Boneyard. The largest aircraft boneyard in the entire world is located in Tucson, Arizona. It's called the Davis-Monthan Air Force Boneyard, and it began storing military aircraft after World War II, but it still continues to this day. Based on the area's meager annual rainfall, low humidity, high altitude, and hard alkaline soil, Davis-Monthan is the ideal choice for a major storage facility. The desert's geology allows aircraft to be moved around without storage areas having to be paved. By May 1946, 200 C-47 Skytrains and over 600 B-29 Superfortresses had been moved to the facility, and around 30 other aircraft that were being stored there were destined for museums. Then, in 1965, the Department of Defense chose to close the Litchfield Park storage facility that was located in Phoenix, and the Navy's surplus air fleet from then on was transported to Davis-Monthan. In 1985, the American military's outdated ICBM missiles were retired, and they too entered storage at Davis-Monthan. While it's unclear just exactly how many aircraft and other military vehicles and equipment are stored there, it's safe to assume that it's a lot. Based on the fact that the facility opened its doors in 1925 and that the boneyard spans a whopping 2,600 acres, it's anybody's guess as to how many aircraft are in storage here. Back in 1973, during the end of the Vietnam War, they were allowed to store over 6,000 aircraft, so it makes sense that there would be more than that today. Number 4. Motorcycle Lover's Paradise. David Cuff, also known as Dynamite Dave from the website Classic Cycles, had the unique opportunity to explore Lockport, New York's motorcycle graveyard in September of 2010. He first caught wind of this place in April of that same year, when pictures began to pop up on Chris Seward's Flickr account. Image after image of hundreds, maybe even thousands of vintage motorcycles were posted to his profile, sparking Dave's interest. This motorcycle graveyard began to crop up on motorcycle blogs, and Dave just couldn't get the place out of his head. So he decided to take a trip to New York with a couple of his friends to check it out for himself. On September 17th, Dave and his pals drove 9 hours on their sports bikes to North Lockport, where the motorcycle paradise was located. When they arrived, the group hung out around the Erie Canal, where the building the motorcycles are housed in is within eyesight. According to his story on Classic Cycles, Dave was trying to get a feel for the area, and he said he was casing the building like a bank robber. After a while, they made their way over to it, trying to look as inconspicuous as possible. They found a trail that led around to the back of the building, which is when they discovered that it was actually 3 structures linked together. Dave and his friends had to walk through 2 of the buildings before they entered the motorcycle lover's paradise. Dynamite Dave explained that the place was completely trashed and there was stuff everywhere. He wasn't sure if there were squatters or homeless people living there or what, and he didn't know if the owner of the motorcycles would show up, so they explored quietly and slowly. They found a door leading down to the building's basement, where they found the impressive collection of vintage bikes. It was extremely dark and the group didn't bring a flashlight, so they used the flash of their phones to get a good look around. The place was absolutely littered with motorcycles. The building was at least 3 stories high, and there were holes in the main floor where bikes were falling into the basement. Motorcycles from the 3rd floor were also spilling onto the main level. But the majority of the main floor was stable and made of concrete, so the group carefully wandered around, trying to process what they were seeing. They were in shock, as they'd never seen so many motorcycles in one place before. After taking a bunch of pictures and looking around, Dave and his pals decided to leave before they got into any trouble. When he got home, Dave decided to try and learn about the place's history. He found out that the motorcycles had all been collected by a man named Cole, who owned several motorcycle shops over a 50-year period. Cole would buy inventory from defunct dealerships and would take trade-ins of motorcycles. He purchased the building sometime in the 1970s and filled it with all of the bikes he'd collected over the years. Then, in 1997, he sold the place and all the motorcycles within it to another man named Frank, who operated the business under the name Cole's Cycle Salvage. Frank began paying the back taxes on the building, but after Cole passed away in 2002, the place started to fall apart. The roof needed to be replaced, but it was going to cost over $300,000, a price that Frank simply could not afford. The building ended up being condemned by the city, who eventually assumed ownership of it and all the motorcycles inside of it. However, Frank sued the city of Lockport for ownership and rights to the contents of the building and won. But he was given a deadline to get rid of everything by mid-November 2010. Dave became personal friends with Frank, and before the deadline, he met up with him to buy some of the motorcycles that were left in the building. It's not exactly clear how much of the warehouse full of motorcycles was worth, but based on a quick eBay search, each bike was likely worth at least $2,000. When Dave explored the building, he said that there were hundreds of motorcycles, so it's not unlikely that the whole stash of vintage bikes could be worth over $1 million. Would you rather find an abandoned plane or an abandoned vintage car in the woods? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. Number 3. Russia's Olena Bay submarines. A Cold War graveyard full of submarines exists in Russia's Kola Peninsula. This place is half hidden in Olena Bay, next to an off-limits naval base. It was a secret for a long time, only uncovered in 2011. In an area where reindeer, Arctic foxes, and polar bears roam, giant metal skeletons occupy the waters of the peninsula. In the area surrounding Nezametnaya Cove near the town of Gadzhievo in Murmansk Oblast is a graveyard where old Russian submarines went to die. After they served their duty underwater, the subs were transported to this restricted access zone sometime in the 1970s, but after that, they were abandoned. The location isn't far from the Finnish border, where strong winds blow for most of the year. During the Cold War, shipyards had a difficult time completing the orders they received for military ships, and there wasn't much time to figure out how to dispose of old submarines. According to Recycle Nation, some of the subs were used for target practice during military exercises, and many of them were sunk in the process. Other submarines were simply left to decay and rust in the bay, floating to the surface like bloated whale carcasses. Not much time was wasted thinking about the stricken subs, but over time, oil from the vessel's hulls began to pollute the water. This eventually prompted a recycling strategy of sorts, and many of the submarines were pulled from their water by a crane by the end of the 1990s. Then, a private company took over the task of recycling and disassembling the vessel's materials. While some of the submarines were taken care of, others were left in the water once again. Most of the remaining subs were used as training vessels, and one of them even became a museum piece. But an image taken by Google Earth in 2007 shows that at least 7 hulks survived, although they're likely beyond salvaging now. Number 2. The Great Train Graveyard. One of the largest antique train cemeteries in the world can be found in Uyuni, Bolivia. In the middle of the desert, there are several abandoned locomotives and carriages that are no longer in use. This place has since become a tourist attraction, drawing in travelers that are excited to see the dilapidated remains of the trains. Located in southwestern Bolivia, the city of Uyuni is 220 miles south of the capital La Paz. The locomotive graveyard is sitting on a mountainous plain that's 12,139 feet above sea level. Uyuni was founded as a trading post in 1890, and its position in the Andes made it a rather convenient crossing point between Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile, so 4 different railway lines met here. The British Mining Company built the railway system between 1888 and 1892 because they believed that the country would flourish if it had a good transport system as well as connections to Pacific ports. The development of the railways increased the country's mining exports significantly, and Bolivia quickly became the world's largest producer of tin. Unfortunately, the demand for tin grew during World War II, and Bolivia simply couldn't keep up. When the war was over, the mining industry collapsed here, leaving over 100 trains that once carried materials abandoned in the salt flats. And at number 1, Sierra Army Depot. On a 36-acre area of land between the mountains that sit on the border between Nevada and California, there's a massive military machinery graveyard. After America fights in a war, the military dispatches all of its equipment and munitions, and most of the time, they end up in the Sierra Army Depot. This place has machines as big as the M1 Abrams battle tank and items as small as individual bolts. On February 2, 1942, General George C. Marshall signed General Order No. 9, effectively bringing the Sierra Army Depot into being. The depot's motto is "Readiness since 1942", and there's about 80 years of history to substantiate it. The word Sierra references the location of the American military depot, as it's located east of the Sierra Nevada mountains. The storage of supplies is this place's primary operation. The depot was expanded in 1947 in order to include the complete demilitarization of ammunition and weapons. This expansion also included live and demilitarized munitions from the Korean War. Sierra Army Depot also played a vital role throughout Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom, and the Vietnam War. It shipped containers full of supplies overseas to troops on the battlefield, including tracked and wheeled tactical vehicles, maintenance equipment, fuel systems, and hospital supplies. However, a lot of equipment and military vehicles that were too far gone were simply left abandoned at the Sierra Army Depot, and several storage facilities were constructed in order to house the depot's large inventory of supplies and vehicles in order to keep them safe from an unexpected Japanese attack.
6. Kharkiv Tank Graveyard. Rusted tanks extend for over a quarter of a mile, or 0.4 kilometers, stacked on top of the other. Tracks, if they exist at all, are corroded orange. The T-64, an ancient Soviet mainstay and the current workhorse of the Ukrainian army, makes up the majority of the dozens upon dozens of tanks, while T-62s and T-72s are also present. These tanks' journey to this spot is a tale of corruption, waste, and war. But it also provides us with a glimmer of hope for the future. With the Cold War still raging during the late 1980s, the Soviet Union was believed to possess 53,000 combat tanks. As late as 1991, Soviet manufacturers were able to build hundreds of tanks annually. In the final year of Soviet Ukraine's existence, the Malyashev tank factory in Kharkiv alone produced 800 units. But in 2014, when fighting started in the east, Ukraine unexpectedly found itself in dire need of the war machines. The number of operable Ukrainian tanks decreased from 5,000 to just 1,100 between 1995 and 2014. By August 2014, the Ukrainian Department of National Defense estimated that almost a quarter, or 220 tanks, had been seized or destroyed in the Eastern Battle. Many more have undoubtedly been lost in the intense battles since. Ukraine's T-72 force was completely sold off or put on hold thanks to expensive maintenance costs. 1,000 of them at least are rusting away in outdoor storage spaces and are most likely never going to be useful again. Additionally, Ukraine has sold hundreds of tanks on the global arms market, moving it to 9th place, 2010 to 2014, among the biggest exporters of weapons. In the 1990s and 2000s, a trustworthy inventory of operating tanks became virtually impossible to collect by specialists outside the nation, and even from the inside. This was due to the persisting Soviet culture of military secrecy and corruption. No one, not even the Ukrainian military, is now able to accurately account for what happened to the hundreds of tanks that Ukraine received from the Soviet Union. The Kiev Armored Vehicles Plant is one of several outdoor storage facilities around the nation that have hundreds, if not thousands, of these weapons. Since Ukraine's independence, the facility, which was intended to create new machines and armored personnel carriers as well as repair them, has mostly served as storage for the Defense Ministry's belongings. According to Volodymyr Voronin, deputy director of the Kiev Armored Vehicles Plant, the site is neither a junkyard or a tank cemetery. He referred to it as an area for placing redundant state property. In the plant's outdoor area, there are about 350 tank hulls, which is roughly equivalent to 1/3 of Ukraine's modern tank force. Most of them are heaps of trash with trees sprouting out from them. Despite the fact that the area is guarded, curious locals have been known to scale the fence and play in the dismantled combat machines. In search of anything they can salvage from the rusting hulls to sell, homeless people have also invaded. But since Russia's war against Ukraine began, the facility has been refreshed. Tank hulls have been removed from the storage location, repaired, with their wiring redone, new engines put in, and new weaponry too. 5. Aral Sea Shipwreck Graveyard. The Aral Sea was formerly the Aralkum Desert. The sea, located between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan borders, was the 4th largest lake in the world 50 years ago. Over 100,000 people were nourished by its fish. In its place now is a harsh, poisonous desert made by humans. The Soviet government devised a comprehensive strategy to reshape the Central Asian steppe during the 1960s. Then, in an effort to cultivate rice, melons, grain, and cotton, they diverted the Sir Darya and Amu Darya rivers that fed the Aral Sea for irrigation purposes. The Soviet Union had a goal to make cotton a major export, and this was part of that. The Aral Sea was wiped out by irrigation, which helped the desert flourish even more. Water entering the sea decreased as soon as this started. The result was the water gradually evaporating. It was one of the most severe environmental disasters in history, but it has since been reduced to less than 10% of its original size. Old fishing communities were turned into ship graveyards, and the industry was completely destroyed. The Aral Sea, which means Sea of Islands, was formerly home to 1,100 islands. The Aralkum Desert, though, now resembles a post-apocalyptic setting out of a sci-fi film. Only empty, deserted piers and carcasses of rusted fishing ships buried in the sand serve as memories of the sea. The ships are currently used as a place for visitors or animals to rest while passing through to avoid the sweltering desert sun. The once bustling port cities are practically dead. Additionally, the Aral Sea's demise poses a threat to the health of those who resided along its original beaches. The few who stayed have developed a wide range of chronic and acute ailments as a result of toxic dust storms that have been blown in by high winds across the dried-out and contaminated seabed. 4. Barry Scrapyard. British Railways was taken over in 1955 by the government. Soon after, they revealed plans to dispose of a large portion of the old fleet. Around 650,000 wagons and 16,000 steam locomotives were among the new surplus assets. Due to the massive amount of stock to be scrapped, British Railways yards were unable to handle the capacity. As a result, many trains were sold to private scrapyards. The Woodham Brothers Scrapyard in Barry, South Wales was just one of them. At the beginning, they were dismantled and scrapped as they arrived. In 1965, that changed when Di Woodham decided it was much easier to focus on the wagons showing up and to scrap them. The rusted steam locomotives were abandoned, immediately becoming a famous tourist attraction in Barry. Many models at Di's yard were hard to find elsewhere, and enthusiasts of steam trains quickly found that Woodham Brothers offered an opportunity to obtain rare locomotives for preserved lines that had been popping up across the country. The first rescued steam locomotive left the yard in September 1968, and the pace increased through the 1970s. Di was surprised when 213 steam engines were saved for preservation. Barry's final left in March 2013. Di, who died in 1994, was overjoyed about his role in preserving the engines for future generations. Many of his locomotives can now be spotted running on preserved railways throughout the United Kingdom. Would you ever visit the abandoned trains? Let us know in the comments. 3. RAF Folkingham. Folkingham Royal Air Force Station is located southwest of Folkingham, Lincolnshire, about 112 miles or 180 kilometers north of London. It was built in 1940 as a decoy airport for the RAF Spitalgate, complete with dummy planes and people, before being turned over to the US in early 1944. During the D-Day landings, Douglas C-47 Dakotas stationed at this airstrip were used in combat. While in wartime, it served as a troop transport airfield for airborne forces, as well as a training facility for the newly established Royal Air Force Regiment. When the RAF transferred to RAF Catterick in 1947, it was simply left and placed on care and maintenance. Folkingham was referred to as USAAF Station AAF 484 by the USAAF during the war for security purposes. The USAAF station code was FK. In January 1944, U.S. soldiers started to arrive in order to prepare for the 313th Troop Carrier Group's relocation from Trapani Milo Airfield in Sicily. On February 5th, it became a USAAF 9 Troop Carrier Command Station, with 4 separate squadrons of C-47s operating out of the location. The force did, however, begin its relocation to a newly built base in France at Akiet, Advanced Landing Ground B-54, by the end of February 1945, albeit the last elements were not able to leave until well into March of that year. The USAAF held Folkingham despite the fact that most personnel had left by mid-April. In 1947, the station was fully decommissioned. With the site no longer under military control, British Racing Motors utilized it for development testing of their new BRM 16-cylinder 1.5-liter racing vehicle, which was originally shown to new outlets on December 15, 1949 at Folkingham Airport. Later, they expanded the airfield by adding a few more facilities, one of which was important as it served as the BRM engine house. After the war, Folkingham was used as a PGM-17 Thor Intermediate Range Ballistic Missile (IRBM) facility, with 3 operational IRBM launchers controlled by No. 223, Strategic Missile Squadron RAF. When the site was reactivated in the later half of 1958, BRM was transferred to RAF North Witham. After the Thor facility closed down, BRM relocated, and more vehicles were tested at Folkingham, although only for a couple years. Lincolnshire Police utilized the runways and nearby Neeson huts as a driving, training, and skid pan facility. The testing track was abandoned altogether in the mid-1960s, and the airfield was sold to various agricultural professionals. Today, agriculture makes extensive use of the airfield. The majority of runways and surrounding track were destroyed after BRM's sale of the airfield for pea gravel. A few single-lane roads still remain. The land is now held by Nelson M. Green & Sons Limited, which uses the old airstrip to store hundreds of vehicles for spare parts. Among them are a few vintage Caterpillar bulldozers, gasoline Bowsers, cranes, and tractors, as well as ex-military trucks and armored vehicles from the war. There was also a DUKW amphibious vehicle utilized in the D-Day landings. The 3 post-war Thor missile pads are the most visible military structures on the field, with their extensive, reinforced concrete portions making removal difficult and are not worth the cost considering the limited quantity of material that can be retrieved from them. 2. The School Bus Graveyard. The School Bus Graveyard in Alto, Georgia, transforms trash into valued artistic treasures. Each year, painters modify the bus's classic yellow exteriors and give them an updated look. Old buses, trucks, and RVs are transformed into living canvases with vibrant colors and quirky motifs. Alonzo Wade created the 5-acre Business and Junkyard, which is currently co-owned by his son and daughter-in-law, Walter and Debbie. Local criminals started sneaking into Walter's junkyard back in 2008, taking vehicle parts for some money. As a result, Walter decided to build a barrier out of the old school buses and vehicles on the site, which worked effectively to keep the thieves away. Walter saw that one of the buses had a ghost painted on it one day. He enjoyed the art and wished to find the artist instead of being angry about the defacement. Walter was a school bus driver, and one of his former kids ended up as the painter. He was so pleased that he requested the man do additional paintings for the buses. Then, in 2010, a local muralist spotted the artwork and approached Walter, asking for permission to go all out with a larger-scale piece. He agreed on the condition that there would be no climbing on the buses and that all of the art would be family-friendly. Crispy Prints, a local artist group, started painting the vehicles in 2012. They allow other artists from around the world to repaint them each year, keeping the displays new. Singers and bands have staged photo and video sessions there over the years as well. The Wade family not only generously supports these showings, but they also give vehicles to elementary and middle schools for students to paint. 1. Canarsie Trolley Graveyard. Many New Yorkers would be surprised to learn that Brooklyn used to have a trolley system as innovative and emblematic as subways are to New York City. Trolley cars once filled the streets of Brooklyn during the late 19th and mid-20th centuries. Residents were able to travel to neighborhoods as far as Queens, thanks to multiple companies investing in the expensive system. By 1930, Brooklyn had nearly 18,000 trolleys riding throughout the streets. Trolleys provided a public service that was both luxurious and extremely efficient. Wealthy socialites would hire out entire vehicles for after-work cocktail parties and weekend events. Streetcars were overtaken by buses and personal vehicles when automobiles flooded the market and took over the streets. Eventually, the trolleys went out of service. Some were transferred to towns and countries far away. Some even to South America. Museums bought a majority of the others. But a few of the Brooklyn trolleys were buried in a pit the size of a city block in the Brooklyn Rapid Transit Company yard, found at the end of the Carnegie line. To sink the trolleys, the large hole had to be 7 acres and 35 feet, 10.6 meters deep. They made tracks leading directly to the pit. The trolley would then plunge to the bottom. Up until 1939, the hole was used for dumping. It remained open after that, but only for local kids who wanted to use it as a swimming hole. World War II benefited from some of the sunken trolleys. Some of their scrap metal was repurposed for tanks and artillery. The hole was eventually filled in to create more space for the growing Carnacy neighborhood. The abandoned vehicle cemetery now occupies a square block along East 99th Street, between Avenue J and Flatlands Avenue. The section is made up of single-family residences and some apartment units. Though the graveyard has long been forgotten, the Carnacy line, which has been in operation since 1906, is still in service. After modifications, including the use of trolley cars, the line currently houses the L train, which runs from 8th Avenue in Brooklyn to Rockaway Parkway in Carnacy. Thanks for watching. Have you ever found an abandoned vehicle? Tell us your stories in the comments and be sure to subscribe for more videos. See you next time.